It has been a wonderful, wonderful evening. Last couple of days have been beautiful, haven't they? Just
Hmm.
absolutely gorgeous. And I hope the weather where you has been great as well. I made a little TikTok the other day talking about the garden itch.
You got the
I
itch.
got the itch.
You
I went ahead
scratch
and
it.
I did. I went ahead and planted some squash. I normally don't plant my squash to the middle of March. I went ahead and planted my summer squash. Just couldn't help myself.
I think you're gonna be okay.
I think so. We normally have a little cold spell, sometime March, 1st of April, but you can't help yourself on these beautiful, beautiful days just to get outside and do something. Man, you walk around there, you want to dig in the dirt.
What kind you plant?
Oh man, I planted gentry, I planted some zucchinis, and I planted some sunburst
Oh, little
squash. Yep,
patty pans.
patty pans.
Oh,
Yep,
I planted green griller.
yep. Y'all, we got a special guest tonight. Ooh, I'm not going to tell y'all who it is right yet, but just a little bit, we got a good one for y'all. So hang on there. We're going to let everybody join, get everybody get in here, and we're going to bring our guest on in just a minute. In the meantime, what have you planted?
Just some squash this week. I've still got the stuff I started a couple of weeks
You've
ago.
had a bad flower disease. You've been to Home Depot and Lowe's every day for the last couple of days.
Oh, and a couple other nurseries. A
Oh
little
my,
favorite nursery.
yeah,
Yeah, I wish I had that picture of my mama. You cannot see my mama in the back of the car
flowers.
but they were not all mine. Half of them was
And y'all
hers.
jumped the gun on a few of them. I thought y'all, yes,
No.
y'all did. Y'all should have waited a couple of weeks on
Well, I
some.
can put everything on the porch if it
Yeah,
gets a little too.
yeah,
But it was supposed to be in the 30s next week, but it's going to be in the 40s. So I
hmm,
think I'm okay.
yeah. Yeah, we got people joining right here. We got all kind of folks coming in from Florida, Arkansas, from Facebook. Yep. Y'all, we bringing somebody on in just a minute that's going to help you dramatically with your gardening questions. We're gonna talk a little bit to him, and then we're gonna let him answer some questions, y'all. Frank Landry wants to know, Gregory, I have a question about multiplying onions. Go ahead, Frank. We'll see if we can answer. My multiplying onions are getting real close to digging. We're gonna have a few for sale. So everything's. I got to get my corn dirt ready.
You want to show them what we got
Yes.
today?
All right, folks. I'm gonna show you all this right here. Is this not the prettiest tomato plants you've ever seen? Look at there. We have got a whole load of these. Look at there. Look at that plug. We got a whole load of tomato plugs for sale. We're going to be shipping these out tomorrow and Tuesday. We've got tomatoes, we got peppers, and we got brassicas, we got cauliflower, broccoli.
So you get 20 of
20 of
these,
these.
and you can get all the varieties.
You
Or
can order
just
as many as you want, but
right.
our smallest quantity is 20 of these right here.
And we've got Halcinator,
Red snapper,
Better Boy.
Better Boy, which is an indeterminate. In case you don't know, you guys that love us indeterminates, we got one for you, which is Better Boy, and then we got Shelby, which is
Oh, awesome.
a salsa type tomato, paste tomato.
And then our peppers.
Yeah, we got 4 different peppers, I think.
The Halcinator bell pepper, the
Jalapeno,
jalapeno,
banana, Gold Rush,
the Gold Rush, and the
poblano.
poblano.
Yep.
So
And we got brassica as well. We got some beautiful plants. So if you're in the need of any plants, go ahead and put your order in. We'll ship them out in the next couple of days.
so I know what you're gonna be doing the next few days.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
If y'all call for Hoss,
I'll be back there.
he'll be packing plants.
Yep. All right, folks. We're going to bring on a guest right now, and I'm gonna give him a pretty good introduction because I think he's worthy of it. This guy right here has been a customer of ours for a while, but he's also very active on our Row by Row Facebook group. He comes from a long career in agriculture, plant breeding, extension service, worked in research. His special me state of Mississippi, about the middle of Mississippi, Greenville, Mississippi, and I'd like to introduce y'all and bring on our guest tonight, Mr. Donnie Glover. Welcome, Donnie.
Let me add him.
And
Hi,
put Donnie in
Greg.
here.
Hi, Greg. Sheila.
Hey,
Glad
glad to
be
have you,
here.
buddy. Did I say it right? Greenville?
Yes, I live here in Greenville, right in the center of Mississippi on the west side, right
Right
on
there
the banks
on
of the Mississippi.
Mississippi, yeah.
Yeah,
And you told us
it's a
before you know about
go ahead.
snakes as big as fire hoses out there, right?
If you're not careful.
Yeah. All right, Donnie. So we thank you for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure getting to know you. I mean, not only you're a customer, but you become a good friend too. I often joke with Donnie that we're going to bring him. He's retired. That we're going to bring him on out of retirement as advisor for Hoss Tools because he offers so much great insight. And I know if I got a question, I can call Donnie or message Donnie and I can get the truth. So it's great to have you here. So Donnie, you've experimented a little bit this year with high tunnel.
Yeah, I've got I see the kind of the writing on the wall of the environment getting more harsh, and of course where we are it rains so much, and I've always wanted a high tunnel. I had researched greenhouses for years where I grew my plant breeding crops in with the company, and I built a 14 by 50 high tunnel last fall, and just a plastic covered over 4 beds. And it's just a cover for the garden, really. It's not a permanent structure because I can move it. It's a farmer's friend high tunnel. Some of y'all may know what that is. And I really didn't know. I'm having to learn how to garden in this high tunnel because the environment is different. Well, I'm in 8A. I'm in the northern part of 8A. And the best that I can tell, this little high tunnel has put me in 9A. So inside the high tunnel is 9A, and outside in the field garden is 8A. And I'm having to learn how to do that. And got about 2/3 of it planted, and be transplanting tomatoes in a few weeks in there and peppers. So that hopefully I can keep the rain off of my tomatoes and off of my peppers, and I won't have so much disease issues and have high quality,
So, Mr.
And
Danny, introduce yourself and tell us
Donnie, Mr.
Donnie, your background story.
Okay, well, I'm Donnie Glover. I was a research scientist and plant breeder with a couple of major seed companies, and I work with field crops, but I've always been a gardener. I went to Kansas State University. I have a PhD in plant breeding, plant physiology, and plant pathology, and worked in extension a few years when I was younger and did a lot of consulting and liked to work with folks in general. And then in 2017, my health kind of took a downturn, and I had to get a liver and a kidney transplant. And that kind of retired me from the ag industry, which was my lifelong love. And God's been good to me and kind of restored me. So I've taken my lifelong agricultural career and focused it into my gardens. And then I've taken my passion for it, and I want to help other people with their gardening. Help them, I say, to manage God's creation and grow your own food. And I think that kind of my tagline and Hoss Tools' tagline is very parallel. And I think we look at things the same way. So I've kind of latched on to Row by Row as my medium. And I'm going to be posting everything I do and maybe be a good example for some folks. And if I can help anybody answer questions, I'm glad to. So I come from an agricultural career of 30 years into retirement and gardening. But I work at my garden like it's a full-time job, and y'all can understand that. So glad to be here tonight. Maybe we can help answer some questions.
Absolutely. So Donnie, let's talk corn for just a little bit, because that's one of your things was corn. And I love growing corn too. Corn is probably in my top 5 crops to grow with watermelons and tomatoes. I just love growing corn. It is not the easiest crop for a home gardener to grow. It's one of those things that I tell people you need to get a few other things under your belt before you start with corn, because corn can test you a little bit if you don't know what you're doing. I mean, it's real finicky about when it needs water, when it needs fertilizing, and time is a big issue there. So talk to us a little bit about some of the things you think a home gardener that's never grown corn before can do to be successful. I'm going to give an example, everybody out there. I see you transplanted corn. You grow corn and you transplant. I've done the same thing. I've done the same thing. I've been successful with it as well. However, I don't recommend the average person to do it. You can be successful doing it, but your timing has got to be spot on with it. You can't, when it's ready to put it in the ground, it's got to go in the ground then. Otherwise, it's going to get done in that pot. So normally, it's one of those things that yes, it can be done and it can be done successfully. However, you got to have everything right. You got to have the right amount of experience to do that. We always see people plant one or two long rows of corn. It doesn't pollinate. So if you would, let's just talk about corn for a minute and what you think people need to understand if they're beginner gardeners growing corn and what they can be, what they can do to be successful growing it.
Okay, well, first off, corn is the basis of our society. Field corn, popcorn, sweet corn. Corn has been around since the days of Egypt. And they started domesticating corn back, in Bible time. So it's been around a long time. But corn is a grass crop, just like the grass in your yard, just like the crabgrass that you try to hoe out of your tomatoes. It's a grass crop. And actually, if you think about it, grasses grow on their own if you give them half a chance. And corn's no different. But corn is a very large seeded grass. Corn has two main parts to it. Okay, the corn seedling. And I'll tell you how I'm getting there. From the seed, when you plant a corn seed in the ground, you want to plant it about 2 knuckles deep. Okay, if you plant it too shallow, the birds are going to dig it up first thing. If you plant it too deep, well, it may seal over and not come up. So I say about 2 knuckles deep, 2 finger joints deep. But that corn puts up a mesocotyl up from the seed to the surface of the ground. And then there's a junction. And then you get the hypocotyl above that. Well, if there's anything that damages that mesocotyl, the corn won't grow. Okay, if soil insects get it, if something else gets it. So what I'm getting at is early is the life of your corn plant. Corn takes lots of nutrients. I call growing corn, you got to preload your nutrients, your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potassium. And it doesn't matter where the source is coming from, if it's commercial fertilizer, if it's liquid soluble 20-20-20, if it's fish oil, fish meal, if it's bone meal, blood meal, it doesn't matter. It all changes to the exact same chemical for the plant to pick it up. The only difference is the carrier. So plants are very specific in the way they pick up nutrients. And the nitrogen from blood meal and the nitrogen from ammonium sulfate has to be biochemically changed to the exact same compound for that plant to pick it up. Only one form of a biochemical structure for that plant to pick it up. So I like to preload my soil with nutrients, compost, a little bit of pre-plant fertilizer, just got to preload your soil. And then planting time. Corn will germinate sweet corn at about 55 soil temperature. Now, how do you take a soil temperature? Well, you bury a thermometer in the ground at seed depth, about 1.5 inches, and you check it at 7 o'clock every morning before the sun comes up. And if your soil temperature is in the mid 50s, and they're not calling for a monsoon the next few days, it's time to plant corn. And traditionally, here where I am in Mississippi, March is a corn planting time, and then get into April and it's more oil seeds. So sweet corn does really good. It's time to plant sweet corn. You get down into 8B, and man, it'll grow as soon as you get it in the ground. It'll come up and do good. And so if you don't know what your soil temperature is, you can buy these little thermometers at big box store. It just has a little probe like a meat thermometer. You just stick it in the ground about seed depth, and it'll tell you the soil temperature. But you need to look at it 7 o'clock in the morning before the sun hits it, because that's the coldest time of day for soil. And then if you preloaded some nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, you don't have to do anything else for a little while. When the corn gets up, I like to say when it gets up to 3 or 4 leaf stage, or 5 to 6 inches, that's when you need to feed it lunch. And feeding it lunch is nitrogen. And you've got to get some nitrogen on it. Whatever source of nitrogen you choose, it doesn't matter, but you got to get some nitrogen on it. Blood meal, ammonium sulfate, 20-20-20, whatever you want to put on it, it's got to have that. And at that time, when you put that fertilizer on there, you need to hill it, not heal it, but hill it or whatever you want to say. Put some soil to it, but that is not absolutely required. If you're in a no plowing scenario, the corn will put down roots. It doesn't have to have that done. But if you can cover up that fertilizer, you can keep it from volatilizing, because it will volatilize if the ground's wet.
Now, Donnie, what's your thoughts on healing to help prevent suckering?
Well, now suckering, okay, that mesocotyl that I'm talking about produces hormones that tell the plant to either put out suckers or not put out suckers. The junction between the mesocotyl and the hypocotyl, the mesocotyl is here and the hypocotyl is here. And there's a joint, a node right there in the middle. And this part down here produces hormones. And if it gets damaged by insects, by stress, by fungi, by anything, if you're transplanting, you will damage it a little bit. So if it gets damaged, it tells the corn to sucker. Okay, now I like to plant my corn pretty thin so it makes big ears. You plant it too thick, it'll make more kernels, but it won't make as big of ears. So you can thin it out a little bit, and if you want to pull those suckers off, it will make your ears larger, especially if there's suckers, 4 suckers growing. I've seen sweet corn with 4 suckers, and those are nothing but thieves of nitrogen. And if you'll take those suckers off of sweet corn, and if it's planted later in the season, direct seeded, the ground's warm, that mesocotyl is not going to get to send the signal to that node to produce suckers. So people say, well, pulling suckers is not worth it. That's because the mesocotyl hasn't sent its signals to do that. But if you're in cold, wet soils, if it's rained a lot, if you transplant, if you have any soil insects to gnaw on it then you'll get some suckers. And there is genetic variability amongst hybrids to produce suckers. So if you see a lot of suckers, you're better off to go ahead and pull them. It may or may not help you, but I pull all mine.
Does healing the corn ahead of time help prevent suckering?
It can. It can aerate the soil enough that it changes the biochemistry in that mesocotyl. It's a very complex thing. It may cover up the node deeper and reduce the suckering. See, that node between that root and that top, the mesocotyl is the root and the hypocotyl is the top. And that node in between those two is the critical joint in the corn. If that's damaged, then the corn won't ever do anything. That's the reason if you're transplanting it, you got to transplant it early. It needs to be 6 inches tall when you transplant it. But
very small window of opportunity there.
Yeah, you got to have your land ready to go, all rolled up. And even if it rains, you got to go out there in the mud and transplant it. So you can't wait. But after you hill it and you get nitrogen put on it and it's growing good, the next thing you got to worry about is corn earworms. And spinosad does a great job if you'll keep a cover spray on it, weekly or even more often than that. And you'll be eating roasting ears before you know it. But the nitrogen is the key. And
Yep.
if you're in an organic, non-commercial fertilizer scenario, blood meal is your best source of nitrogen, one of the best sources. But compost does not have as
Well, you
much
can use chelated
nitrogen as you think.
nitrate.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
you can use
Chelated
chelated nitrate,
nitrate.
but you got to be careful not to use much of it.
Well, I think you need to just kind of read the label on there, and it'll tell you about how much to put on it. And if you put it a little bit farther away from your corn, you don't have to put the side drifts right up next to the stems. You can put it 6 inches away from this row, because this fertilizer, all the fertilizers, have to go into soil solution before the plant can pick it up. It not only has to go into the soil solution, but it has to be biochemically changed to that nitrate nitrogen form with free ammonias that the plant can pick it up. So any fertilizer that you put out, understand it has to undergo biochemical changes in the soil solution before the plant can use it. So it doesn't use it in any fertilizer. It doesn't use it just exactly as the product that you put out. It all has to be biochemically changed to the exact compound that the plant can pick up. And that's not just in corn, that's in tomatoes and squash and everything else. So
Right.
understand that there is a soil solution. The soil is a living thing, and it has water in it, and the fertilizer moves in the soil with the soil solution.
Yeah, that's one misconception out there that people really get confused about. The plant does not care whether that nutrient is organic or synthetic at all.
The
It's going to
difference
take it
is
and
the
it's going to,
carrier. The
yeah. And
difference is the
sometimes the
carrier.
chain, so Donnie, on organic, some of the stuff, it may take a little bit longer for it to chain down so it's available in the plant than some of the synthetics. So like if I'm planting my corn early on and I'm using organic fertilizers, sometimes you have to take in consideration that it may take a little bit longer for it to convert than some of the synthetics. But in warmer weather, the chain is not noticeable near as much, correct?
Well, if you'll take something like alfalfa meal, it has to be degraded by microorganisms, and it has to decay in the soil before it releases the nitrogen. That's why it takes longer. And the microorganisms are much, much less active when the soil's cold. Above 60 to 65 degrees, the soil starts to really hop with
Yep.
biochemical pathways. But below about 60 degrees, the biochemical pathways are real slow.
Yep. So talk to us about varieties of sweet corn. What's
Well,
some of your favorites?
there are several classes of sweet corn. And the classes of sweet corn basically are how fast after you harvest it, the sugar is changed to starch. Again, here I'm a biochemist, so I can try to relate this in a way. When you harvest that ear of corn, it's at the sweetest. At I want to pick it at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I want to have it for lunch. That sort of thing. When you pick it, the clock is ticking. The quicker you can get it cool. I never ever pick corn in the afternoon. I always pick it when the dew is still on. You have to get soaking wet. Pick it early at daylight when it's the coolest. And then, commercial growers run it through a hydro cooler with chilled water. The quicker you can cool that off, it slows down the degradation of the sugars in the kernels. Okay. And the older sweet corns like Silver Queen and Merit and things that I grew up growing and taking to the farmer's market in downtown Little Rock, um, those things genetically change that sugar into starch within 12 hours if it's not hydrocooled. Whereas some of the new augmenteds and the new super sweets, have genetics inside of them that keep those sugars from changing to starches real quick. Folks say, "Oh, I love Silver Queen. I would never plant." Well, I planted Silver Queen, when I was in high school, taken to the farmer's market. And it's a great sweet corn for about 12 hours. But after that, it changes to starch. And the newer products, man, the Seminole and Temptress and all those things, they'll hang on to their sugars a lot longer in normal home storage than does the older hybrids. So it's all biochemistry and all, biochemistry 101 and something that I've had to deal with in my career as to how to keep things from degrading, not just vegetables, but all kinds of things. Pollen, for example. We had a dickens of a time when we were harvesting pollen and shipping our pollen to Costa Rica to our winter nurseries. And the exact same biochemical pathway that changes the starches in sweet corn, changes the sugars to starches, did the same thing to our pollen. And I had to figure out how to desiccate it before I shipped it. But that's the key, is knowing that the newer corn hybrids really hang on to the sugars a lot better than the older corn hybrids.
And they give you a lot more option as far as harvest window as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Silver Queen, if it was ready on Friday, you better pick it on Friday and sell it on Saturday. That was my old philosophy. You get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, pick your Silver Queen, take it and set it inside the house where it was air conditioned, and you put it on the truck at 5 o'clock the next morning, and you hope you're sold out by noon. That's kind of the philosophy behind Silver Queen and all the classes of standard corns. Nothing wrong with them, but the new super sweets and the augmenteds and all these new things, give you so much more flexibility, and they make a great gardener out of a good gardener. So you'll be a lot, some of those don't have the early season emergence abilities. I planted some Seminole in some pots in my little greenhouse. When did I plant those things? This is Sunday. I planted them Wednesday, and they're spiking today. That's how fast Seminole comes out of the ground. It is a fast growing sucker. And it also has great shank below the ear for a home gardener. It allows you to be able to have something to get a hold of, or commercial folks might not, if you're harvesting, might not like that, but it's great for a home gardener. So
yeah, I met with a breeder a couple of weeks ago, and I told them, I said, one thing that really amazed us was the window of harvest. We found it anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks, which is very unusual to have that large of a window when that corn gets ready that you can go out there and pull it and it still be good.
That's right. And that's part of the objectives for the breeder, is to have something that will give you a little bit more time to harvest it. Because, man, if you got to go see the grandbabies and your sweet corn's ready, man, I pull a little bit, take to my son, but most of my sweet corn's going to have to hold till I get back.
That's right.
That's kind of a scenario that's what plant breeders. I'm not a proponent of all the heirlooms and stuff, because we have, and I'm one of, or I was one of them, who bred disease resistances and stability and growth into all these vegetables and all these field crops. We worked real hard. And if you're sticking on all these old varieties that may not, they'd be harder for you to grow, for one thing. So, and corn,
yeah,
corn's no different.
A little misnomer most people don't understand is most, if not all, your organic farmers are successful because they grow disease-resistant hybrids.
Well, disease resistance was 50% of my objectives when I was a plant breeder. I worked on a lot of different crops, not vegetables. I worked in field crops, but I had to have, for example, my soybeans had to be resistant to Asian rust, to Phytophthora, to Rhizoctonia, to all these diseases, and we see in vegetable crops as well. But you know, they do the same thing in vegetables. If we're breeding these new varieties, it kind of like cheating growing some of these new hybrids and these new varieties compared to the heirlooms.
So let's talk about tomatoes, Mr. Donnie. Tell us what varieties you're growing this year and what's your favorite?
Well, I got my favorite tomato right here. And it's 3 weeks old.
Wow.
Can you see how big that is? 3 weeks old. And it's Shelby. Now, mind you, I am a sauce person, not a slicing person. Okay, I grow Hossinator and I grow several other slicers, and I love them, but that's not my forte. My forte is salsa, spaghetti sauce, Rotel tomatoes, all these things in jars that I can keep. And I got a lot of family that likes those things. And Shelby is absolutely the best paste type tomato that I've come across. It's firm, it even ripens even, it grows really fast. It's not overly large vine. I'm gonna grow Shelby is my favorite tomato, and it's very disease resistant. Okay, and but Bella Rosa is a great tomato. It will have a long life as a variety. As a successful plant breeder, how long your varieties live that's kind of like your children doing good. If you release a variety and it does well and it goes to a large volume, that's like your children doing well. And I've had lots of children, and Bella Rosa is a fine tomato, and the other tomatoes that are in your product lineup are fine tomatoes. Hossinator makes some of the biggest slicing tomatoes that you ever want to put your hands on, and it gets huge if you give it adequate fertility. So
yeah,
go ahead.
Speaking of Shelby, the foliage on it's pretty dense as well. That's one thing I noticed with it that I didn't with some of the other paste tomatoes, with the amount of foliage on the vine, which in our neck of the woods means a lot because it protects that from sun scald.
Absolutely. There is no sun scald with Shelby, and you can prune it. Don't be afraid to prune your tomatoes. I prune a lot. I probably prune more than most because I like to have large clusters of tomatoes all about the same age. I prune clusters as well. If a cluster has 6 or 7 tomatoes on it, I may prune a couple of tomatoes off of that cluster to increase the size of those tomatoes that's on that cluster, to get them all the same size, all at the same time, where I can have a couple of bushels of tomatoes to make, I can get out my jambalaya pot and make a huge batch of salsa,
So how far up on the vine do you prune or do you sucker Shelby and Hossinator? Do you go all the way up or do you go third or fourth?
Every time I start at the first fruit cluster, I'll prune everything off below the first fruit cluster. All the leaves, all the suckers, everything below the first big fruit cluster. The leaves and the stems below the first fruit cluster do nothing except attract diseases. See, the funguses that get on our tomatoes live in the soil. And if your soil is uncovered and rain comes down and splashes dirt up on the lower leaves, well, you have immediate fungal inoculation. And you're putting early blight, and you're putting all those diseases up on you, just like you mixed up a batch in the lab and went out there and sprayed it on the leaves. Because if the rain splashes soil up on the leaves, then you have disease inoculation. That's the reason mulches are so important. And I wouldn't grow a tomato without some kind of mulch, whether it be a newspaper, plastic, landscape fabric, hay, or straw. You got to be careful with the hay, but something that you know doesn't have any herbicides in it. Some kind of cover on that ground to keep the soil from splashing up on the leaves. And if you'll cut those bottom leaves off below that fruit cluster, then that reduces the amount of disease inoculation into the plant. If you'll remove all those leaves and all the suckers below the first fruit cluster, okay? Now, everything below the first fruit cluster is worthless. So you may be 18 inches above the ground without any leaves. And that's the way it should be. Okay?
So you sucker all the way above that as well.
I do. There's three train of thoughts with pruning tomatoes. I'll just cover those right quick. The first is not to do anything to the determinate tomatoes. Just let them grow. Okay? And that's fine. You'll get a lot of vines. You'll get some good tomatoes. Okay? But I'm not in the business of growing vines. I want to grow fruit. So you can prune it to 1 liter. In other words, the main stem that goes up through there, prune out all the suckers and let all the leaves grow. And that's the second. That's called a single liter. And you got to have a pretty good trellising system. You know, I do Florida weave on my determinants, and I do tomahawks on my indeterminates. And but you can prune out all the suckers, and that will reduce the amount of foliage in your plant, and it will put more nitrogen, which is phytochrome, into the fruit and make your fruit fuller, ripen more uniformly, and do better. And then some people prune off as you harvest from the bottom up. Even these determinants are not completely determinate. They start ripening at the bottom a little bit. But as you pick the tomatoes at the bottom of the plant, you prune off those leaves as you go. And don't just throw them down on the ground. You need to get those leaves out of your garden. That's a source of disease infestation. That's a source of inoculation for the rest of the plant. So if you see leaf that's turning a little bit yellow, cut that sucker off and get it out of there. It doesn't matter if it's at the top of the plant. Remove all the disease. And then an alternative to the single liter is you can develop 2 or 3 liters. And that'd be three stems growing up. And then you prune all the suckers off of those 3 stems. And that works real good in cages if you got some 48-inch or taller tomato cages. If you built some wire cages or something, square cages. I've seen people build them out of 2x2s and things. But 48-inch net cattle wire or concrete wire, even 6-foot tall concrete wire makes excellent cages. Put you a T-post by each one. But you can do multiple liters, you can do 3 liters, or you can do 1 liter. And that's on determinants or indeterminates. Indeterminates, I really go to 1 liter.
A lot of the commercial guys use suckering as a method to determine what size tomato they're going to get on their crop. So if they're after a 6.6, which is a medium-sized tomato, they won't sucker as much. But if they've got a market for a bigger tomato, they can actually determine that by the amount of suckering they do. I always thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, it's amazing. I bet about 90% of your customers want the biggest tomatoes they can get. Pull the suckers off, pull the leaves off. Any bad leaves, get them off of there. Because you're putting the plant sucks the nitrogen and phosphorus and potash out of the ground, and it comes up the vascular system through the tomato, and it's distributed through the vascular system into the leaves, the stems, and the fruit clusters. Well, if you cut off a lot of those leaves and you cut off a lot of the, you're going to put more nitrogen, what plant physiologists call phytochrome, into that tomato, and it's going to get bigger. And if you want to grow the huge tomatoes, take off a couple of those tomatoes off of that fruit cluster, and you'll grow bigger tomatoes with only 4 tomatoes on a fruit cluster than 6 tomatoes on a fruit cluster. Depends on what your goals are. Just like commercial growers having a market for smaller tomatoes. And the Shelby is a smaller tomato compared to the slicers, but it's just about the biggest paste type tomato I've ever seen.
Right. So let's just touch, because we're going to be getting into the season before long. Let's talk about blossom end rot for just a minute here, because there's so much misinformation out there that, and if I hear add Epsom salt one more time to cure blossom end rot, I get it every year. And these people are diehards about what they thought they've heard or read or whatever. But actually, and I tell people this all the time, magnesium can displace calcium. So it can actually do you more harm than good. But we have these diehard people that will argue with you all day long. You got to add Epsom salt. So talk to us just a minute, if you would, about blossom end rot, because I think that's one of the biggest problems most people have growing tomatoes, and it can be disheartening.
And sometimes you get it no matter what you do. Start off with blossom end rot is the inability for the plant to pick up calcium out of the soil to translocate into the fruit, and the tissue at the end of the blossom begins to die because of a calcium deficiency. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have calcium in your soil. That doesn't mean that you haven't done everything possible to saturate your soil with calcium. It means that the plant can't pick it up. Now, why is that? Calcium is not very mobile in the plant like nitrogen. Nitrogen is highly mobile. In other words, the plant can pump it wherever it wants to. It can pump it to the leaves. It can pump it to the fruit. Calcium is kind of like molasses in the veins. Okay? In a cold morning, you can't hardly get that molasses to pour out of that bottle on your pancakes. And calcium is sort of the same way early in the season. It is very hard for the plant to get that calcium out of the soil solution. Again, the calcium has to be dissolved in the soil solution for the plant to use it. It has to suck it up the vascular system. It has to suck it up the xylem tissue inside the stem, and it has to be translocated out to the fruit clusters. And if it's real cold, if the plant has a lot of nitrogen and is growing really fast, it's really hard for it to pick up the calcium. Okay? This is mainly early in the season. When I say early in the season, in zone 8, we're talking about in May, early May. Early May and mid-May is when you have blossom end rot issues. If you get blossom end rot and you've done everything you can do to put calcium in the soil, just wait a while. It'll go away on its own. But now before I plant, I am a soil loader. I load nutrients before planting. I use balanced fertilizer, and I use the pelleted gypsum just like a fertilizer. And in fact, where I'm planting tomatoes has had the fertilizer and the gypsum applied for 6 weeks, because I want to give this fertilizer a time to go into soil solution before I plant it. So I put my fertilizer out early. It's not going to wash away. It's going to be there. Give it time to go into this soil solution. And then when I plant, hopefully that calcium and the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium will be in soil solution and readily available for the plant to pick it up. If the transplants go through a lot of transplant shock and it's cold and wet, you're better off to wait a little while transplanting than plant it into 50-degree soils, because the transplant's just going to sit there, and that's going to slow everything down. But as the plant starts growing, as it's putting on fruit, I've seen blossom end rot hit small fruit the size of golf balls, because the plant can't pick up the calcium. So, and pelleted gypsum is your best source. I use it because I have a high pH anyway. If you live in a lower pH area, you can use some hydrated or pickling lime as a calcium source. And it will, ground limestone takes a long time to dissolve. But if you need to raise your pH of your soil, you can use some hydrated lime. And when I was growing up, I used hydrated lime as a calcium source. I didn't know what pelleted gypsum was, but I used hydrated lime as a calcium source. So with tomatoes and all stone fruit and all cucurbics and all nightshades all have this calcium problem. They all have problem picking up calcium in the soil. Those are the two main classes of plants that have trouble picking up calcium, are the squashes, the cucumbers, all that class, and then the tomatoes and the peppers and the eggplants and all the nightshades. If you take everything you can do to get the calcium in your soil, do it ahead of time. Make sure there's adequate moisture, irrigate as soon as you water your plant, as soon as you transplant. Do everything you can do. If the environmental conditions is right, you'll still get some blossom end rot. I had more blossom end rot last year than I care to mention, and it did not proliferate itself across varieties. In other words, there was not much genetic variation in blossom end rot. The articles that I've read about blossom end rot, that it's not genetically controlled. It is abiotic. It is environmentally. It's an environmental biochemical thing. And there's not much difference between rot. So do everything you can do to preload your soil with calcium. Do everything you can do to not over nitrogen, not to over fertilize with nitrogen before, I like to use the master blend fertilizer at fruit set. It's high potash and high phosphorus, and very little nitrogen. So I put a lot of potash on my tomatoes to prevent blossom end rot.
Let's see if we can get a few questions in here, Donnie. I think we've got a lot of people wanting to get your take on some questions here. So let's get into them right here. All right, Patty Town wants to know, is broken up seashells good for your soil?
Broken up seashells is an excellent source of calcium, but it'll take 12 months for it to dissolve and go into the soil solution.
Same thing with eggshells, right?
Same with eggshells. Same thing with ground limestone. Like you'd spread on a pasture,
Yep. Yeah, a lot of people want to put the eggshells in there, and it's fine. It's a great calcium source, but it's not going to do any good on this year's crop.
It's great for next year.
Yep. All right, we got Kathy Roberts here. She says, hello from Tennessee. I have a space 9.5 by 9.5. I grew beans and tomatoes and bell peppers. I know 7.0 is neutral. Now I'm hearing 5.0 or 6.0 is better. Is it lower? How do I get mine lower? And I'm assuming she's talking about pH here.
What did she say her soil pH was? 7?
Donnie. I'm assuming she's trying to lower her pH. She's at 7.0 and she's trying to lower her pH, which I don't think she needs to lower it much, maybe just a little bit. I wouldn't be overly concerned with that.
I believe that compost will take care of everything she needs to do. She doesn't need to put any artificial chemicals or Compost is kind of like Vicks salve. It kind of cure anything that's not too severe.
Having a little lagging issue there. All right,
Yeah,
so let's move on to the next one here. Is cow manure good for the garden straight out of the pasture? Boy, that's a loaded question.
well, I'm terrified of E. coli. Okay, and it wouldn't take very long for it to biodegrade. But if you're talking about putting it on the garden and planting it the next day, you risk an E. coli infestation. It needs to be composted first. 6 weeks, 100, and it will kill all the E. coli. It's great nitrogen source. It's a great organic matter. Now, if those cows were fed hay that has some long persistence herbicides in it, such as picloram or grazon, then that will carry through the cow's digestive system into the manure. And if it's fresh, it will damage your garden. So if you don't know where it's coming from, if you don't know what they were fed, it needs to be composted. Hot composting at 140 degrees minimum will pasteurize your compost. So that's about it.
All right, Keith A wants to know any problems if I plant cantaloupe and winter squash in the same plot?
Absolutely not. They're only that are the same genus cross. Just because they're in the family, in the cucurbits family, just because they're in the same family doesn't mean they're cross. They have to have the exact same genus and species.
Yep. And we got another one here. How deep do you take soil temperature? I think you covered this earlier, but you may want to cover it again.
Seed depth, whatever you're seeding at. If you're planting corn 1.5 2 inches deep, you take 1.5 2 inches deep at 7 o'clock in the morning. If you're planting beans 1 inch deep, you take it 1 inch deep at 7 o'clock in the morning. So that's the key, is the morning time.
David Casey, thank you, Mr. Donnie, for advice on the row by row page. You were who I asked when the Arctic blast got my Tom onions. What should I do? I seen your onions took quite a hit too. Did they come back pretty nice?
I tell you what, my Tom onions are just wonderful. We've been eating them, and they're just beginning to put out some pod. Now, they burned down. I had a tremendously cold Christmas freeze. I lost all my carrots, even in the high tunnel. My carrots all died. All my onions outside died. Onions, each one has now producing 24 onions. So they're wonderful. And I'll let those go to seed and dig them and increase them, spread them out over a larger area.
Yeah.
But Tom onions, you can't hardly hurt them.
No, they're very, very, in fact, I find myself over taking care. I try to do too much for them. They're one of the things you're better off to leave alone. I fertilize them like I do my Vidalia types, and they don't like that. They don't like that much fertility. They don't like to be messed with a lot. They're meant to just put out there, do the minimum thing to them, and leave them alone. I think they do a lot better.
I think they're kin to wild garlic.
Yeah. Yep. All right, Roger Box, is there any newer sweet corn comparable to the old Merit? Seem it would mate with very little water. Merit's been going now for a couple of years.
I used to grow Merit. I grew merit when I was in high school, and I'm 65 years old, so you know how old it is.
Yep.
The reason it didn't take a lot of water is because it did not have a very strong metabolism, and it would change to starch before you could get it picked. And the newer varieties, the newer corn hybrids are a little bit more like racehorses, and the older varieties are a little bit more like plow horses. Okay? Those old plow horses, you could toss them an ear of corn in the evening and they'd be ready to go the next morning. Well, if you did that to a racehorse, it never would win a race. And the plant breeder's been working to win races for 30 years now. And they have developed classes of racehorses. So when you're growing these new hybrids, you're growing racehorses. And the old Merit was an old stubborn workhorse out there. So, you know.
Yeah, I tell people this right here, Donnie, and I think you'd agree with me. If you're new to growing corn, you've never grown corn before, and you're not sure about the fertility and everything, these older Silver Queen type, Merit type varieties are easier for the beginner to grow. However, once you get your feet underneath you and understand how to do it, move on up to some of the better varieties. They are a little more forgiving.
That's right. That's right. But you need to eat them pretty quick.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
around here, that's not a problem. I mean, sweet corn is my favorite food. I'm going to try to have 4 months worth of fresh sweet corn every week. My goal this year.
Wow.
10 planting dates.
Wow.
That's my goal this year. Not very big plantings, but 10 blocks this year. That's my goal, is to have 10
So
blocks.
how far are you, what's your planting windows? How far between your window, your planting times there?
In about 4 to 5 weeks. And depending on the season, later on, I spread them out a little bit more. They're a little closer together early in the spring. My first 2 dates are transplants. Hey, I'll have corn 18 inches tall when the farmers around here plant their field corn.
Right.
By transplants. And the first I'll try to, I've got some coming up now, and then I'll have about 4 weeks I'll plant another batch, and then about 4 to 5 weeks I'll start direct sowing in the field, and then about every 4 to 5 weeks, depending on the hybrid and the maturity of the hybrid that I use, and I grow multiple hybrids, and about 4 to 5 weeks. And I have a little bit of overlap sometimes, and there are some times that I have to go to the refrigerator and get an ear that was picked last week. But if it's a modern hybrid, it's still sweet, even if it's been in the refrigerator for a week or 10 days.
So we got Brenda Milner says, does calcium nitrate work the same as pelletized gypsum?
Calcium nitrate is an excellent source. I didn't mention that, but that is my source of side dress nitrogen on all the cucurbics and nightshades. I use calcium nitrate. I use the water soluble calcium nitrate, and I inject it with the Haas fertilizer injector. But you don't have to do that. You can apply it granularly, or you can mix it up in a bucket and drench it. Doesn't matter. Depends on how much you got to do. Because I have a drip tape by every row of everything. I'm 100% drip, and everything has at least one drip tape. So I can inject anything or everything or nothing. And but I do drench. I do mix up 20 in a 5-gallon bucket if I just got a little patch of something. I'm doing a lot more little patches of things than I am a big field of anything, just because of my family situation. I don't need as much as I used to. Kids are all gone. So,
yep.
But you can.
So we got Sonia Moran. I'm sorry. Calcium nitrate is great. The only thing between it and gypsum, just to clarify on a question there, gypsum doesn't have any nitrogen in it. They both have calcium in there. So if you want nitrogen and calcium nitrate is a great source there. All right, so we got Sonia Morin says, so what do we do for calcium if we've already planted? And I think we've covered that just a little bit. Calcium nitrate and again gypsum as well is a good source there for.
Now you can side dress with gypsum. There's nothing wrong with it. You need to cover it up because again, it has to go into soil solution. And if you're hilling something, you can put it on both sides of the row and hill it, and that will cover it up, and that will it will dissolve and go into the soil solution, and that's the best thing you can do. That's the reason I tell folks to do front loading of these things before you plant. Next year, plan on doing it before you plant.
Good point. All right, from the Facebook, we got hello from Dixie Metal Farms. Oh, got old Will over there. He said, Mr. Donnie is the man. Will's a good friend of ours. I love watching Will's garden. Will grows a big garden. And man, he does a great job at it. We love to see his pictures on the row by row. Thank you, Will. My new Tennessee home says, does pickling lime work immediately, or how long does it take to break down?
Pickleram has a label.
No, Donnie, I think he's talking about, I may have mispronounced it, pickling lime.
Oh, okay. I can't see the questions. It's too small on my phone. Pickling lime will work within a couple of weeks if you'll get it dissolved. It has to go into soil solution, just like the gypsum.
Be careful adding it if you don't need it. If you raise that pH too high, cause yourself some major issues. So definitely know what your pH is.
You need to know what your soil pH is. Okay? If you don't do anything but go buy an aquarium pH testing strip and mix some soil up in a little water in a cup and stick that strip down in there to determine what your pH is. Doesn't cost very much. It's real easy. I use litmus paper all the time to determine what pHs are. I test all my compost. I test in each patch, and I use just some little litmus paper, with the indicator color on it. It's great to get a full soil test to send into your county extension office. That's a lot of trouble if you want to do 20 pHs a year. But the indicator strips, you just take a little bit of soil, mix some distilled water. You need to use distilled water. Mix a little distilled water, make a thin mud, and stick that litmus paper or that pH indicating paper down in there and leave it for a little bit and pull it out and compare the colors. That'll tell you what your soil pH is. It's easy.
Yeah, I've never done that. That's a good point, Mr. Donnie. I mean, I've always relied on either pH meters or either, the county extension or the state universities, but that's a great.
Well, that's easy, and you can do it as often as you want.
All right, so we're going to try to get one more here, and this is from Zon Zabrowski, and he's got one of those questions that's always hard to answer. I have a 100-gallon grow bag, 6 by 2 by 12 inches. How much 5-4-3 fertilizer should I use in each?
Does it give you a rate on the label? You have to have a baseline rate before you can reduce that rate to a given volume. So much per 100 square feet or per linear row. You have to have some baseline before you can determine that. It's easy to determine. It's actually a proportion. It'll give you so much to use per 1,000 square feet or per 100 linear foot a row. And then you take that and you got to do a proportion to the volume that you're working with. And it's actually an algebraic problem where you cross multiply. And it's pretty easy actually. But if it says
it's always tough to answer. Especially in a garden situation where the garden on the flat, because we got different soil types, we got different crop types. These are really tough questions to answer. We try to give people general guidelines growing, but the the answer could be different for different people in different locations, different crops and things like
That's
that.
right. That's very difficult for a consultant to answer without having all the background information.
Donnie, it was a absolutely pleasure to have you, and we've enjoyed it, and I know all our viewers has as well. And we look forward to a good gardening season coming up. We look forward to seeing what all you got going on, see the results that you post out there. And thank you so much for being a part of our Row by Row group. I think everybody just loves to see what you got going on and really respects your opinion when you chime in and tell them what they need to do or what they don't need to do. So thank you for being a part of it. And we're gonna
Thank you
get out of
very
here.
much for inviting me. I
Yep.
really.
All right, we had a little lag in there. All right, Mr. Don, we will see you on the other side when spring gets here a little bit further. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.